Welcome to the second annual Gwen Ifill Forum. I am Brian Norman, Dean of the Gwen Ifill College of Media, Arts, and Humanities at Simmons University in Boston, where we have been committed to women's education, inclusive leadership, and social justice since 1899. On behalf of President Lynn Perry Wooten, I welcome the 1,500 people registered for today's event. I want to thank the incredible team who made today possible in Ifill College, advancement, marketing, IT, and members of the President's Advisory Council on Diversity and Inclusion. They beautifully reimagined a digital event that expands our reach. Thanks also to the Dean's Advisory Council, especially Bert Ifill, Gwen Ifill's brother, who has been a font of support and wisdom from the beginning. Gwen Ifill was a trailblazing Black woman journalist, an icon of excellence, and a beloved alumna of Simmons. Today marks the 4th anniversary of her passing. All who knew her as a friend, colleague, mentor, or trusted face of the news miss her dearly. When Simmons named a college after her, we accepted the honor and responsibility to become part of her legacy for the next generation and for the community who lifted her up. That mission drives all that we do. With the Ifill Forum, we pay tribute through conversations that matter. Last year, we focused on race, media, and democracy with Yamiche Alcindor, Judy Woodruff, Asma Khalid, and alumna Maya Valentine. This year, when I sought guidance from the Dean's Advisory Council, we quickly landed on facing hard truths. Amid 24-hour media coverage of a presidential election with profound consequences for our democracy, we knew that no matter the outcome, there would be hard truths to face in an ongoing racial reckoning amid deep division, misinformation, voter suppression, a pandemic, and unreconciled history. We also wanted to honor the breadth of Gwen Ifill's influence across journalism, politics, art, activism, and the law. So today we get to learn from one of the nation's top filmmakers, one of the best columnists around, and the nation's leading civil rights lawyer. These 3 Black women are providing moral clarity and vision to a nation greatly in need of both. The panel will last about 45 minutes, concluding with brief remarks by President Wooten, who is in the first year of her own breakthrough presidency. Immediately following, we want to continue the conversation by inviting all members of the Simmons community, including alumni, to a reflection led by President Wooten. At Simmons, we want to equip the next generation to turn conversation into everyday action on our campus. Or, as Gwen Ifill once said, you have to decide what you care about and then be prepared to act. If you've not already registered for that follow-up reflection, there is a link or will be a link in the chat bar. So let's begin with this year's Gwen Ifill Next Generation Award. The award recognizes someone who embodies that legacy through professional excellence, civic engagement, and mentoring the diversity and talent of the next generation in their field. When the Ifill Dean's Advisory Council considered the nomination for this year's honoree, Ava DuVernay, there was an immediate moment of alignment and clarity. It simply felt right. To confer the award, I'm happy to invite last year's recipient, Yamiche Alcindor. As White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, she shows the nation every day what excellence in journalism looks like through truth-seeking and asking the hard questions. Yamiche?
Thank you so much, Brian, for that introduction. And thank you so much to the Gwen Ifill College of Media, Arts, and Humanities at Simmons University for creating this signature event and award to honor the life of Gwen Ifill, who left us 4 years ago today. Gwen was so much: a journalist, an icon, a loyal friend, a trailblazer, a mentor, a voice for truth and justice, and a brave and courageous soul who never backed away from facing the hard truths and educating the world about them. I miss her deeply. I miss her mentorship to me personally. Her presence during this chaotic year have often found during her, try not to get emotional. Missing her presence during this chaotic year, I found myself wondering, what would Gwen say? What would Gwen do? How would Gwen cover this? It's a blessing that we can watch her past coverage from years ago and get a sense of how she never wavered in the face of adversity and pressed forward even when she was attacked personally. That same courage, that same dedication for justice, education, and truth is found in this year's Gwen Ifill Next Generation Award recipient, filmmaker, and director Ava DuVernay. I have to admit, it's a bit surreal and a bit sad to do this virtually, but it is the honor of my lifetime to present this award to you, Ms. DuVernay, someone I look up to so much and who personally inspires me to keep fighting for what's right. The late civil rights leader, Congressman John Lewis, often said we all need to do our part to make this world more just and to get into necessary and good trouble. We are all so grateful that in filmmaking, Ms. DuVernay, you have found your good trouble. Your work has put on the screen some of the most moving, inspiring, and necessary truths about this world. This world is infinitely more informed because you have walked in your purpose with grace and confidence. Your films and series have shaped a generation of Americans, and especially Black Americans, to embrace and respect the distinct experience of Black people in this country. Films and series like Selma, 13th, and When They See Us were the Black history lessons desperately needed in a country that has sought and continues to seek to brush aside racism that has terrorized Black folks for generations. Queen Sugar has laid bare the complexities of history, how it remains with us, how it courses through our families, how it dwells in those who seek to hurt us, and how history never, ever goes away. Your work has also shown Black joy, gifting us Girls Trip and A Wrinkle in Time, reminding us that Black people, and especially Black women, can dream their biggest dreams and go after them with no limits. And the beautiful images of people, and Black people in particular, in your work also shows what it looks like when Black folks are seen, really seen, as full human beings and given roles, the care, the lighting, the depths that they deserve. You are, in fact, and in being, a national treasure who deserves all of her flowers today and every day forward. I thank you so much for touching my life personally through your work, and thank you for gifting us your talent and your skills as shown through your films and series. You've already made one of the series that you've already made and the series that you will make in the future. In a year that was a tough one, in a year where life and death has been on the line, in a year of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, in a year where injustices faced by Black folks have faced for generations, have left us more vulnerable than a pandemic killing us disproportionately. I hope that this award can serve as a bright spot for you and a reminder of just how much you are needed and admired. Please, all of you, join me in virtually congratulating Ms. Ava DuVernay, the 2020 Gwen Ifill Next Generation Award recipient. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yamiche, for that. I wish I could hug you. I'm such an admirer. I'm such a fangirl. I wanted to fight and laugh and clap for you and get up there and talk to people and point people in your direction. And I just think you're so brave. I don't know how you've done what you've done this year. I don't know how you've done it. But I follow you. I read you every day on Twitter. I watch you often, and I marvel. And so really, really beautiful I can't believe this is how we're meeting, but I look forward to a hug without masks one day in a beautiful future. So thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, President Wooten and Dean Norman and the Simmons University faculty and staff and students and Sherrilyn Ifill and Michele Norris and all the people who've come together to envision and create a space for a forum in Gwen Ifill's name. I think this is an extraordinary that this time is set aside each year. Who gets that? You know, Gwen Ifill does, and rightly so. I'm honored to receive the Next Generation Award, and just want to talk a little bit about the blessings that came to me when I was able to spend small bursts of time with her over the last few years of her life that continued to impact mine. Michele would set up several dinners and lunches in DC when I would go there. And this was a big deal for me because the ladies that Michele would put together, first of all, it's Michele. And, you know, she said, just a few friends. I'm just getting a few friends together and we'll have dinner. And Gwen Ifill walks through the door. Like, these are your friends? Just the heavy hitters coming down. to sit and talk. And Gwen would come and share time with me at these dinners, lunches. And it's one of the first times that I ever experienced being welcomed by grown Black women in a sphere of sisterhood with no strings attached beyond comfort, good food, and togetherness. I was hosted and held by them. It was a holding of my hand through a new phase for me of being a known person in the world, and a new phase of my own development and maturity. And I've since taken to trying to emulate those times by hosting and holding people in very much the same way. I didn't even know it was something to do. I just didn't come from that. And so I modeled myself, and I am modeling myself after the women who gathered, and Gwen was a huge part of those gatherings. She would come and share time with me, share stories, share advice, share laughter. She made me feel like one of the girls, and her impact on me in that way continues. Professionally, she figured into my journey at two key points. The first time was in 2013. I had the pleasure of sitting before her for an interview for a documentary I made about Venus Williams's fight for pay equity in sports. I remember the nerves the night before in the hotel as I crammed for the interview. Who crams for? I don't cram for the interview because it was Gwen Ifill, because I wanted to sound smart and I wanted to impress her so much. I wanted her to leave thinking, oh, okay, she's okay. And I went in with all these nerves, and what I found was a kind-hearted woman who made me feel so comfortable. And although she had many accolades and great accomplishments, those things did not feel additive to the person before me. They couldn't be, because the person before me was so formidable and frank and fierce and warm and wise and wonderful that no award or trinket or accomplishment can make that. She just was that. And all of those other titles fell away. And I was just in a conversation with this beautiful sister. And I remember it so vividly, the honor of that. My kind of biggest memory of Gwen is during a controversy that swirled around for a film I made called Selma. Some people felt that I tarnished the great legacy of LBJ by suggesting that the civil rights movement was not his idea, and that the passing of the Voting Rights Act was not his victory alone. And there was a lot of vitriol and a lot of mean words said, and I was shook. I didn't know how to handle it. Some very powerful and vocal white people were very mad at me. And I was a Black woman, indie filmmaker, releasing my first major movie for the first time. And the criticism of something that was so factual and clear to me shocked and shook me. I look back at the interviews I did during that time, and I can feel the fear in the interview as I watch it now. I can feel myself trying to balance what I really wanted to say and what I had to say to promote the movie. And of all the interviews I did for that movie around the world, hundreds, one stands out. That was my sit-down interview with Gwen Ifill. She told me that it would be okay and just to speak my truth. I remember thinking, this is never going to work. Why is she so calm? She doesn't understand what's happening here. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I was very, very nervous. She said, I said those things to her. She said, it's okay. Just speak your truth. She was such a consummate journalist that she never crossed the line to say, I got you, it'll be okay. But she was reporting after all. But she did make me feel that she had me. And so as I settled into it and she got the nerves out of me, we had an exchange that for me in the midst of that storm was a soft, warm place to land. And I will forever be grateful for that. It's the only interview that I look back at and see even a sliver of myself in during that time. And it was because of her. The last time I saw her was at a panel for Selma at the museum. I was just looking at pictures of it this morning. On one side of me is Gwen Ifill, and next to her is Congressman John Lewis. I'll post the picture on my Twitter for anybody that might want to see it. I remember her being herself, interested and intentional, wise and warm and wonderful. She left an impact on me that night because I remember walking away saying, she's so breezy. Everything comes easily to her. I want to be like that. The integrity and the intelligence loomed large, but it was effortless, it felt like. It just felt good to be in her presence. And I was grateful for that night and still. I went back and looked at an op-ed that she wrote during the Don Imus travesty. And I'm struck by the first and the last line. She said, let's say a word about the girls, the young women with the musical names, Kia and Epiphany and Nate and Essence and Katie and Dee Dee and Rashadat and Maya. Let's see if we can manage to build them up and reward them. She did that for me on several occasions. She built me up. She rewarded me, maybe when I didn't even deserve it. She made me feel like one of the girls. And if you're a Black woman, you know that there are few things more special than that. So I want to thank you, everyone involved in this honor, because it truly is an honor for me, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamiche, and thank you, Ava. To be hosted and to be held. Those are really, really beautiful words. Thank you for sharing them. Now it's my honor to welcome Michele Norris, distinguished journalist, author, and dear friend of Gwen Ifill, who's a columnist for the Washington Post and founder of the Race Card Project. She'll moderate a conversation with Ms. DuVernay, and Sherrilyn Ifill, president and director-counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, scholar of civil rights, and, if I had my way, future Supreme Court Justice. Michele?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for convening and bringing us all together. And thank you, President Wooten, also. Can I just say before I introduce Sherrilyn, which I will do in just a minute, Gwen would love this. She would just adore this afternoon. She would love that there is this sort of sizzling Black girl magic here on screen. She would love that Ava and Yamiche are now in connection with each other because of the mentoring that she was doing over generations. And although we are not all together, I think each of us in our own individual space is probably feeling her spirit right now. I know I certainly am. So we're joined now by Ava and also Sherrilyn Ifill, who is Gwen's cousin. She is the president and direct counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. You know, every time I say this, I hear my father, N2ACP Legal Defense Fund, because that's the way he always said it. She is the 7th president of the Legal Defense Fund since it was founded in 1940 by Thurgood Marshall. And I can think of no one who is walking this earth who better embodies the spirit, the warrior spirit of Thurgood Marshall. So Sherrilyn, thank you for being with us. And Ava, thank you so much for making time. We are going to talk about hard truths. We are going to talk about hard truths because Gwen is someone who held our hand and squared our shoulders and helped us confront hard truths. And we're going to talk about hard truths because we are swimming in all kinds of them right now. Because we just had an election, I want to begin by asking both of you, what hard truths should we take from this election and its continuing outcome?
I defer to the Queen.
So first of all, thank you all so much for just this wonderful gathering. Michele, you are absolutely right. Gwen would love this. There would be drinks and great food afterwards. And so I guess we each have to have that individually. Congratulations to you, Ava, on receiving this award. I can't think of anyone better to receive it. And really for your incredibly beautiful words that so captured the essence of Gwen as a woman, a colleague, a friend, a professional, all of those things. So thank you so much for that. And Yamiche, thank you as well. I remember Gwen talking about you and the delight she took in mentoring you. And I just have loved seeing the work that you're doing, your dignity, your professionalism. So I'm just thrilled to be here. And congratulations to President Wooten. And thank you, Dean Norman, for having me so much. What have we learned from this election? For some of us have learned more than others. What is very apparent and what we cannot turn away from is that American democracy is in crisis and has been for a very long time. And those who were willing to turn away from the truth now have to confront the truth. We have to recognize that this country has not gone as far as many people hoped it had, that the wound is deep, and that our use of Band-Aids to cover it simply will not do. And that we have an incredible amount of hard work to do to get at the root of what is really wrong with this country. And that the myths and legends we tell ourselves about who we are, shouting "we're number one" at a sports event, calling yourself the greatest democracy in the world, all of those things that you say about yourself will be belied by the way in which your country actually performs and behaves and executes democracy. And what we saw in this election is that the reason that this election actually went forward in a way that allowed people who wanted to participate is the same reason that this country was able to be a great country that called itself great, after the Cold War. It is really because of the work of civil rights activists, of people who live at the margins, of democracy fighters who are willing to go in and do the dirty work and make sure that this country stays really from the precipice. And we are still not very far from the edge of that precipice. It is the work of people who have been committed to trying to be full citizens in this country that has really saved American democracy time and again. And this election is yet another example of that. And to think we're going to survive with a small band of people linking arms, it's going to take many more of us. And in fact, there were many more of us in this election who really worked hard to make that happen. So I think the hard truth is confronting how precariously we are perched on the edge, and the breadth and the depth of the work that lies ahead of us. It's work that absolutely can be done. It is work that absolutely is being done by many. But if people think that you can vote and then walk away, no, this is the beginning of the work, not the end of the work. And if people really want to live in a democracy, they're going to have to commit themselves to that work.
Thank you, Sherrilyn. Ava?
For me, the hard truth learned, I guess it's twofold. The true fragility of the American idea. And the other hard truth is that we're not crazy and haven't been crazy all this time. You know what I mean? That experiences and the reality of what's been deeply felt and endured by Black people and ensconced in tales of systems and sometimes individual incidences, all of that's been broken apart and writ large, and now it's all out in the open. You can't say it's an individual issue. You can't say it's a system. It's both things, all of it, and everything in between. And this year, and this election has broken all that open. All the ugly, all the dirt is laid bare. And the excuses that we normally give to move past these moments, we can't give those excuses anymore. They won't be tolerated. They're unacceptable. And what that does for so many people is authenticates what they've long felt. So when I say we're not crazy, right? It's as a people, as Black people, as Black women, throughout generations who have felt this hand on their chest and have been told, oh, that's not a hand on your chest. That's just one hand on her chest. That's not you. And that's not a hand on your chest. That's just the atmosphere. That's just the system. Now we know that it's both those things and it's so much more. And that the numbers and the behavior and the rules and every aspect of this matrix has been laid bare to the point that anything else is just fiction. And we're now in a place where we can either continue to tell ourselves stories, or we can embrace this reality of hard truth that we're in and find a way forward. And so all that feels very fragile and very uncomfortable, but I feel like it's a hopeful place to start from, because we're able to, if we seize the moment, move out of myth making and move into a place that is based more on what more people have experienced and are experiencing.
When we talk about myth making, it's possible that we might be in the midst of that as well, because we've heard a lot of talk throughout the spring and the summer, a tumultuous spring and summer, about a racial reckoning, which suggests that something has happened, that we are moving forward. We're hearing a lot of talk now about a need to bring the country together, despite this great cleave, despite the fact that more than 70 million Americans voted for someone who was unapologetic in his racism. So how do we continue to confront hard truths when our default seems to be to try to move to a place of comfort, to try to get to something that, we just because people recognize racism, that recognition is somehow becoming a reckoning, like, oh, we did something and we can pat ourselves on the back for that. Just because we're at the other end of election, there is a need for people to work together, but healing sometimes suggests a sort of a forgive and a forget posture, that we're going to move on and put some of this stuff away. How do we continue to confront hard truths when so many people are more interested in comfort?
Well, that is a super fantastic question. And Michele, I've been very troubled, as you know, by some of the rhetoric of unity and healing and so forth, not because I don't believe in those things. I believe passionately in those things. And I've spent quite a bit of time studying, countries that have gone through tremendous difficulty, South Africa and Rwanda and post-Nazi Germany. And, this is important to me. And I've also...
Can I just stop you for a minute, Sherrilyn?
Yeah.
We just need to take a moment to just absorb what you just said, that America never saw itself in that category. I just want to, and that's where we are right now, in comparing ourselves to countries in terms of post-conflict resolution.
Yeah, and I don't take that lightly. I wrote about this when I wrote about lynching. Once again, a large issue. Ava said something really important. We're not crazy. Part of what made me want to write about lynching was how much people were gaslighted into believing that these events didn't happen, or that they weren't significant, or they didn't still have resonant power, in the 21st century. So it's not that I'm against healing or unity. It's that I am passionately in favor of the process that gets you there. And frankly, the goal for me, and I don't, I'm unapologetic about being a civil rights lawyer, is that I'm not actually trying to get to, a place of love. I am personally, but as in my professional self, I'm trying to get to a place of justice. And I really believe that what cascades from justice is the potential for healing and unity and so forth. And you are absolutely right, Michele, that the default in this country is that we immediately start patting ourselves on the back for a baby step of progress. And of course, that's what happened when Barack Obama was elected and then reelected, that many Americans used that as an opportunity to try and convince themselves that America had moved past its racist past and now was in a new era. And I do think it was important that Barack Obama was elected and reelected. It was a step. I don't ever deny that. I just think that people tried to make more out of it than it was. And during those years, if you were working as I was as a civil rights lawyer, you were constantly met with the question, but do we need an NAACP legal defense fund anymore? Haven't we really just arrived? And yet in those years, when we had the first Black president, those are the years when, we were litigating the voter suppression cases in Texas, voter suppression in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and so forth. The Supreme Court was issuing these terrible decisions like the Shelby County versus Holder decision. People somehow seem to forget that Eric Garner and Mike Brown were killed in 2014 when Barack Obama was president. We all watched Philando Castile bleed out in that car while Barack Obama was president. We watched Walter Scott running in that park and shot in the back by police officers, right? So it isn't that the election of Barack Obama meant that these issues were not present. They were very present, but people started to tell themselves the myth. So to really get to the question that you're asking, Michele, which is how do we not do that this time? And it goes fast. So I've been really clear that we have to get in this narrative space immediately. And I've been, for example, trying to address the myth that this election went so smoothly and was problem-free, when in fact it took, a veritable army of activists and lawyers to make sure that people would have the right to participate and vote. And even then, people stood in line for 3 and 4 hours to vote. And we can't forget who did get the opportunity to vote, the formerly incarcerated persons in Florida, who should have been able to vote because their right was returned to them by a statewide referendum. But then the Republican governor and legislature sought to undermine that. And even though we took that to trial and we won at a virtual trial, in April, then the Court of Appeals turned that back and the Supreme Court let it stand. So they were not able to participate. Are they part of the calculus of how smoothly this election went? So part of the way you deal with this is that you don't stop truth telling. It makes you uncomfortable. It makes you the skunk at the garden party, but we can't ever stop the truth telling, even as we work to try and deal with how we confront and hopefully, bit by bit overcome and deal with the deep, deep racism that is burrowed into the foundations of our country. Ava suggested that, we're beginning to see it. The wounds are all open. They are, many of them are. But there's so much more to go. There's so much more baked into our institutions and baked into our legal system and baked into all of the different systems that govern our country that we have to excavate and expose and allow people to see. But then you can't just do that. I always say that our job as civil rights lawyers is not only to see and identify the scaffolding of injustice, but then to actually have a plan for how you dismantle it and how you put the tools in the hands of ordinary people to then create a new scaffolding that they want of a just society. And those two pieces are also critically important. It's not just the truth telling, it's not just the exposing, it's also the vision for something new and then the tools to build something new.
One of Gwen's favorite statements was that people need to be able to hold two thoughts in their head at once. And so when people tell the story of the largest number of voters participating in an election that we've seen in 100 years, that is a good thing, but it's also important to remember the things that you pointed out and that you pointed out so elegantly in an article that just ran in Slate this week. I'm inviting anyone who's listening to us to go back and find it because you should. That idea of holding two thoughts in your head, I guess, also speaks to what you saw, Ava, after Selma was released. For a long time, people had one thought in their head around who was responsible for the signing of the Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act. And when you presented something that confronted that perhaps told a different story, a fuller story, people were very uncomfortable with that. And the arts play an important role in how we propagate these myths, but also how we interrogate these myths that we're talking about. What lesson did you take from that we should all pay attention to in the way people responded to Selma and your portrayal of history? Why do you think people were so uncomfortable with the idea that more than one person perhaps should have been able to take credit for the signing of these laws, which changed America and changed all of our lives and paved the way for the participation that we saw in the election this year?
Well, in that particular instance, you're dealing with ideas of who can save who and who's the savior and who gets to write the story and author our history. So a lot of that was involved in that time for me and around the film. And I think, we have to make sure that doesn't happen again, that when the story of this time is told, that it is as full-bodied as it was experienced. These are the times when history is shaped because it's the storytellers who cement what was. And so it's vital that we continue to speak up and tell the story and tell all sides of it. You know, you can see how this whole year can be rendered through a certain gaze 20 years from now. You can hear the talking points. And so it's crucial that we now start to not even create narrative change, not even get into a place where the change there doesn't even have to be a correction, because we get it right from this moment. And so it's really crucial that artists, historians, you know, across the board, journalists, legal professionals, academics, we have to be on the same page about the fact that there is no one way to tell the story. And that too many people participated, too many people experienced different parts and paths to where we are now, and that all needs to be honored and needs to be in the foreground. You know, the story of us as a country is written word by word and line by line. And the idea of a racial reckoning happening that is complete is a myth. The idea that we are in the midst of a page and that this page is eventually going to turn, is a valid idea to me. I know that people will experience next year as it relates to their ideas on race and class and culture in a different way than they did last year. Many people have new vocabulary, new experiences, new examples to draw from, to contextualize how they're feeling. And the whole thing is incremental. History is just it's just a bunch of days strung together, right? And you can't really see the effect of what the reckoning might be until we get some time. But I feel it happening. Is it all positive? No. But there are new words, new lines being written in the story every day. Probably at more rapid a pace than I would like. I can't read that fast. It's a lot changing every day. But I feel it happening little by little. And one last thing I'll just say is, you know, nothing that I don't feel too out of sorts with where we are right now, because as a student of history, a small student of history as I am, while some of it is shocking in the way that it is being shared, it's not surprising that it exists, because there's precedent for everything we're experiencing, and we know that it's there. Now it's named and numbered. Now it's laid bare. It's tough to see the 70 million people, but we knew. You know, I mean, we knew it was there. So that's why I say it's something about, you know, these myths breaking apart. And it's not really that many people. And I don't know, if people have a choice, they'll choose. Well, no, it's half the country, and they live on your street, and they're at work with you, and they're on the subway with you, and they're around you, and that is a new part of the story that we need to tell. This idea that you were crazy, that's not true. You're taking it too far. Why don't you just forget it and move on? How are you ever going to get past it? You're a race baiter. You're all the things we hear. Don't go on to Sherrilyn Ifill's Twitter and put in her name and hear the filth that comes at her every single day, because she wants to stand up and tell a certain side and a certain part of the story. So that's what we have to defend against when we talk about, you know, how to stake claim to this narrative right now. It's part of the racial reckoning is that we claim the story and that we hold on to it. We make sure that it doesn't get washed out as time goes on.
Everyone who is participating in this program today is a storyteller of one kind or another. Yamiche gives us the hot take every day and helps us understand and contextualize what happened in the world. Sherrilyn, you tell stories when you step into the courtroom, because the narrative is so important in creating the river of law that flows through our lives. And of course, Ava, you are a storyteller across several fronts, in television, in documentary, in film. But at this moment in this year, Ava, of so much tumult and uncertainty, I'm wondering if you feel like you want to just do everything. You just decided to take Isabel Wilkerson's fantastic book cast and turn that into a documentary. Are you also drawn to perhaps leaning into what happened this summer or leaning into the story of COVID in some way?
Actually, I'm making Cast not as a documentary. Most people assumed that it was a documentary, but I'm making a feature film. I had a very well-known white man filmmaker call me and say, "Oh gosh, it's so great you're doing a documentary on this." Like, I was trying to think how to do it, but I thought probably could be an Ava DuVernay documentary. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not making a documentary. What are you making?" And I said, "You'll see." So I have some different ideas about how to break that story open. And I'm excited about it because who knows what path that'll lead us down. In terms of what you talked about regarding this year, I'm so grateful to have that little space on the dial. The television dial is a long, long line, and it's got big, powerful players on it. There's a little space where a Black woman director can do her own thing, and it's called OWN. And I have this little show called Queen Sugar. This is a show that it's small. It's a small show in the grand scheme of things. But the people that watch it know what it is and know what the intention behind it is. And I was so moved that Yamiche even knew what it was. So that always gets me when someone watches it. And I'm writing it now. And basically, it's a time capsule of 2020 through the lens of the black family that we follow. Totally rewrote the season, and it starts from March 15th, 2020 to Election Day. And you see this family go through everything. They go through, we're going to close our diner just for a couple of weeks. We'll be back on April 1st. I look back at my notes and I actually wrote, "Oh, we're shutting down the set, but to my crew, but we'll see you on April 1st. We actually thought it would be 2 weeks. To Confederate monuments coming down, to Chris Cooper and the Birdwatcher, to New York City and refrigerated trucks and morgues and no PPE and no masks, to waking up one morning and hearing about this awful tape and not sure that you wanted to watch it, and then feeling like you had to watch it and seeing something that was so grotesque in the murder of George Floyd that there were no words. And the expanding awareness of what happened to Breonna Taylor and all of the protests that followed, and COVID numbers rising, and the over-indexing of Black death within COVID, and unemployment, and all through the lens of the family that we follow, the Boardwalk family. So I'm fortunate to have 10 episodes, 10 hours to explore that through this very small show. And I hope that one day, years from now, if anyone looks back at the show, it will serve as a time capsule for what it was like to be a Black family in America this year. And so it's been a real honor to work on that. And we're doing that now, and working on Cast, and working on a series about Colin Kaepernick, and trying to tell the stories that will animate an acknowledgement and a forward movement in a different direction for people who care about these issues. And the hope is that through our work, more people will start to care and act.
I can't wait to see the Bordelon family take this on.
You're one of the 3 people that watches the show, Michele.
I just have to, point of order. It is not a little small show. There are a whole lot of us.
Okay.
Set the dial. Make
they all come to your house. But yes, thank you.
Sherrilyn, that first draft of history is important, but the stories that we tell ourselves are really how we write that first draft of history in terms of COVID and what we're seeing now with the third wave and the exponential growth. It's hard to imagine what the holidays are going to look like. It's hard to imagine what January is going to look like. What are the hard truths that we need to confront, not just on a government level, but we're talking really about storytelling in the arc of this conversation, in terms of taking the lessons from the first and the second wave and making sure that we apply them. We can't talk about doing this for the next pandemic. Yeah. We have to figure out what to do in the next 2 weeks, the next 2 days, to figure out how to, I don't know that we can reverse these numbers. Sanjay Gupta on CNN described that this is almost like a battleship that's moving, and when you hit the brakes on, the battleship doesn't stop moving for another 50 miles. So we're going to see, sadly, some incredible growth. But what are the role of hard truths in trying to help us better confront this moment, particularly as we are now passing a baton in terms of leadership and perhaps getting a different kind of leadership to deal with this?
Michele, that both Gwen and I come from very large families, right? Her family, 6, I had 10. And I have always credited that America was at a period of investment and belief in public goods and public systems that made her family's story possible and my family's story possible, because otherwise it would have been impossible. And that's public universities that, were in reach, public transportation, good public schools for a very brief period. All of that was available. And to the extent we have attached a kind of racialized notion to investments in public life, which is what I believe has happened, it has provided the opportunity for this country, again, with racism in its foundations, to disinvest from public life. And when you disinvest from public life, you leave your vulnerable populations even more vulnerable. And what we've seen in this COVID-19 pandemic is damning and shaming. And I'll talk about it just very briefly in 3 ways. I'm going to say this one first because I'm afraid that we'll run out of time and it will get lost. And I just don't hear it being discussed enough. But there are a number of us who are involved in litigation trying to protect those who are incarcerated from COVID infection. And I'm telling you that when this country finally is able to see, and it is revealed, what is happening in our prisons in this country, the massive, real-time human rights violation that is happening, as we hold a population of people in the most inhumane, horrifying conditions, knowing that we are exposing them to a deadly pandemic, the kind of terror that they are living in, we will not be able to look ourselves in the face as a nation. It is the shame of our nation, and it will come out. So there are a number of us who are litigating these cases. These are cases we tried to get very quickly up to the United States Supreme Court so that there could be some relief. The district courts, the trial courts understood, gave favorable decisions in many of these cases. Courts of appeals turned those decisions back. The Supreme Court used what we call its shadow docket, basically just decided that it was not going to reverse the appellate court's decision. And so now we have to go back and try those cases. But every day we try those cases, these people are held in these conditions. So that's an issue that has to be addressed and has to be resolved. Secondly, the economic crisis that people are in for Black people is unbelievable. It has been estimated that 40% of Black-owned small businesses will not make it out of this pandemic because of the failure to pass relief bills that actually are accessible to the Black community. If you are a barbershop owner, the people who rent the chairs in your barbershop are not exactly employees. So the way they constructed the first relief bill with the employee stuff didn't exactly work, right? So we knew that we hadn't hit that population. And yet that next bill, which was passed by the House in May, sits on Mitch McConnell's desk, no relief. We're looking at tens of millions of people who are facing eviction in the next 4 months unless we do something. We're looking at people who are facing water shutoffs in the middle of a pandemic. We're looking at people who are facing electricity shutoffs. All throughout this country, people are living on the edge, Black people disproportionately, and they are afraid, and they're right to be afraid because our government has essentially walked away. When you hear people talking about a vaccine next summer, if you received an eviction notice this week, how does that work for you and your family? If the water has been shut off in your home, how does that work for you and your family? And in our conversations, as we have been talking about politics and the election, and I've been a part of it as well, it is as though we have forgotten the human rights crisis that is happening in this country, mostly to Black and brown people as a result of this pandemic. Last thing I'll say is back to voting. What happened with voting is so shameful. In March, when Wisconsin had its primary, they also tried to expand absentee voting opportunities because of the pandemic. And the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court turned it back on the shadow docket once again. I've always said that watching how many people came out and stood in line with their masks on to vote in that primary election actually radicalized me to the extent I could be radicalized, in the sense that seeing that determination of people to vote, I was determined that we were going to make every effort to open up absentee voting. And we filed a number of cases in the South. Again, all won at the trial court level, turned back by the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court shadow docket. I want to explain what that means. When I say we won at the trial level, I mean that when we won that case in Alabama and a trial court judge saw that disabled people and elderly Black people had not seen their grandchildren in months, were afraid of contracting COVID and wanted to vote absentee, but needed to get all of these witness signatures and all this stuff, and ruled in our favor and issued a 197-page opinion. You talk about storytelling. That's why I like to try cases. 197 pages in which a federal judge details the burden on those who are disabled and those who are particularly vulnerable to COVID. Turned back by the Court of Appeals, once again, shadow docket Supreme Court. So that decision now no longer exists. 197 pages of detail. You talked about those words, Ava, the storytelling of what it is. The beauty of trial court decisions is that they actually enshrine a reality. You can look them up years later, right? But the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court essentially get rid of those decisions. And so all of that fact finding is lost to the ether in a process that essentially takes that story and renders it null and void. So when I think about what we need to see over the next few months, I am really just excited about Queen Sugar because I want to say, from the legal perspective, to the extent that we too are storytellers, our stories are being snatched from us, our storytelling. Our storytelling is being snatched from us by the way in which the court system has operated to allow them to nullify these careful decisions about what is really happening to Black people on the ground. Same thing with the prison cases. And so I think that as we, think about what is going to be needed, it's not like what's going to be needed in a few months. It's what's going to be needed on Monday. I don't understand. Is there a reason why Mitch McConnell, who shows up every day to put more judges through, can't work to pass a COVID relief bill that will save people's lives, keep them in their homes, keep their water on? Again, you talked about myths, people feeling very proud maybe of the election, how many people turned out and maybe how the election turned out. But there's a lot for us to still feel quite ashamed about. There's a lot of work for us still yet to do. So I hope that people will get a sense of urgency about these matters that are before us. These aren't insoluble problems. The solution's right there. All we need is the will of leadership to make these things happen. So, I'll just say that I think that the storytelling piece is so vitally important. I don't want to find out what the real story is years from now. We need to be telling these stories in real time. And that's the lesson of the civil rights movement, because I have always believed that we became so enamored with the story of the civil rights movement that we almost allowed it to sit in amber. We liked it was covered with that nice sepia color. And it was like this great story that existed at a moment in time. When in truth, you have to constantly refresh the narrative of your struggle, because new narratives are popping up all the time. So my hope for this year, especially given what we have been through as lawyers this year and the painstaking work we've done to tell the true story of Black people living in Alabama who just want to vote, right? And seeing that story essentially neutralized, I'm really even more committed now to thinking through not only how we bring those stories out in the court system, but how we do the kinds of structural changes that have to happen in our court system to ensure that the kind of thing that happened this year can't happen. And then, I'll just say it one more time, that I just ring the bell about the story of what's happening in our prisons as often as I can, so that people will pay attention to a population that we have allowed to be shut away and that we have allowed to be treated in this most horrifying way without any recourse. We are going to have to face it, and we're going to have to face it soon.
We have seen so many bright, shining examples of Gwen's legacy. I believe that she still shines bright like a beacon, like a lighthouse that helps guide us through these difficult moments. And we've seen that in her mentorship and the relationship that I think will continue to develop and blossom between Yamiche and Ava. I look forward to seeing that. We see that in her storytelling. We see that in the way that she confronts hard truths. And we talk about storytelling. I think it's good for us to think about not just telling stories, but capturing stories, making sure that we're cultivating and excavating stories. Ava, as you talked about Queen Sugar, my mind is percolating because I'm thinking that in that moment, it's a time for people to come together and collect oral history because a lot is happening this year. And when you watch that, sit down with your family, put a recorder on the table and record what happened because it's important to remember all of this. Bert Ifill wrote a poem in honor of his sister who left us 4 years ago today. And I'm not going to read the entire poem, but we're going to make sure that it is posted somewhere so all of you can see it. I'm sure that the Gwen Ifill School at Simmons will do something with us, but I just want to leave us in the little bit of time that we have left with the last portion of that poem, because I think it captures her life so beautifully. He says that Gwen Ifill's gift to us was that she held our hands as she held our attention. Her smile soothed and coaxed us, that we could make an easier alliance with the truth, an easier alliance with the truth, an easier alliance with hard truths as well. And thank you for joining us so we could take some time today to remember Gwen's legacy, to remember the importance of hard truths. And I hope if you have listened to this today that you figure out how to follow the beacon of her example in terms of telling hard truths, in terms of storytelling, in terms of reaching out, and in terms of mentoring. Sherrilyn, Ava, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Ava. Thank you, Sherrilyn. Thank you, Yamiche, for the clarity and for the truth of your voices. At Simmons, we are deeply grateful for your time and inspired by your visionary leadership. For a final word and invitation, I am proud to introduce President Lynn Perry Booten.
Thank you. On February 6th, when I took my presidency, it was 6 weeks before the pandemic, and I began July 1. And I can say every step of the way, Gwen's spirit has been walking with me. Gwen was my sorority sister, my fellow AME religion, and Gwen was a Simmons shark. And as I think about the 4th anniversary of Gwen's death and what Gwen's doing in heaven today, I know that she's happy. She's probably hosting her own girlfriend party, but I think she's also celebrating because all of us were here. The Black Girl Magic, as you mentioned, coming together to discuss these hard truths. Thinking about what it means to lead and to be a just society. I want to say thank you to Yamiche, thank you to Sherrilyn, thank you to Ava, and thank you to Michele. You have challenged us to face the hard truths, to ask the tough questions. Gwen talked about this notion of the audacity to have ambition. And I believe all of us here today have that audacity. Ambition for a more socially just society. At Simmons, we talk about our mission is to prepare people for their life work. And Gwen exemplifies that mission. Her life work was storytelling, socially just actions, asking the hard truths and reporting. And, that work wasn't only in her profession. Bert also talked to me about her gatherings and bringing people together in community to enact that. I know that Gwen liked to cook and had good recipes and saw food as a way to do it. It was in her civic engagement. It was in her everyday persona to make sure that if you interacted with Gwen, she brought out your best self while you faced the hard truths. I want to close with an interview and a quote that they used in LA Times that was originally, I think, in Washington Magazine, where Gwen said, we can't expect the world to get better if we're not intentional about preparing it for the next generation. And as we leave here today, I'm asking each of you to think about what can you do to prepare for the next generation? How are you going to be intentional about making the world a better place? How are we each going to live Gwen's legacy? And so thank you again. I hope post-pandemic, Ava, Michele, Sherrilyn, Yamiche, I owe you a good home cooked meal. And please come to Boston. My specialty is my 7-cheese macaroni and cheese, and I will cook it with a good pound cake and a salmon. So I look
You don't have to say it twice.
I look forward to seeing you in person.
Make this happen.
Yes. And maybe some cobbler and sweet potato pie.
Okay.
So thank you for your thoughtfulness, your admiration as you recognize each of your admiration. And really thank you for all the women. I think about the women in my lives, the shoulders I stand on, the women that I mentor. I think about my daughter and how you're role models for them. For the Simmons community and the community in general, thank you for coming today. And the Simmons community, I look forward to seeing you in about 15 minutes when we're going to do a deep dive about our role and responsibility for being the most inclusive university in New England and what it means to make a socially just world for our next generations. Have a great Saturday, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.